It went on for 5 minutes without stopping, and by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chance to utter any protest had passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling on his shoulder. He looked around. It was Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane. It led him around to the end of the big barn, where the 7 commandments were written. For a minute or two they stood gazing at the tarred wall with its white lettering. "My sight is failing," she said finally. "Even when I was young I could not have read what was written here. But it appears to me the wall looks different. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin?" For once Benjamin consented to break his rule, and read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now except a single commandment. It ran, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." After that, it did not seem strange the next day that the pigs who were supervised the work of the farm all carried whips in their trotters. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had bought themselves a wireless set, where arrangements installed a telephone, and taken out subscriptions to John Bull, Tidbits, and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange when Napoleon was seen strolling in the farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. No, it did not seem even when the pigs took Mr. Jones' clothes out of the wardrobe and put them on. Napoleon himself appearing in black coat, rat-catcher breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite sow appeared in a watered silk dress which Miss Jones had been used to wear on Sundays. A week later, in the afternoon, a number of dog carts drove up to the farm. A deputation of neighboring farms had been invited to make a tout of inspection. They were shown all over the farm and expressed great admiration for everything they saw, especially the windmill. The animals were weeding the turnip field. They worked diligently, hardly raising their faces from the ground, and not knowing whether to be more frightened of the pigs or the human visitors. That evening loud laughter and bursts of singing came from the farmhouse, and suddenly, at the sound of the mingled voices, the animals were stricken with curiosity. What could be happening in there now? For the first time animals and human beings were meeting in terms of equality. With one accord they began to creep quietly as possible to the farmhouse garden. At the gate they paused, half frightened to go on, but Clover led the way in. They tiptoed up to the house, and such animals as were tall enough peered in the dining-room window. There, round long table, sat 6 farmers and 6 of the more eminent pigs. Napoleon himself occupied the seat of honor at the head of the table. The pigs appeared completely at ease in their chairs. The company had been enjoying a game of cards, but had broken off for a moment, evidently in order to drink a toast. A large jug was circulating, and the mugs were being refilled with beer. No one noticed the wondering faces of the animals that gazed in the window. Mr. Pinkerton of Foxwood had stood up, his mug in his hand. In a moment he said, "Would ask the present company to drink a toast," but before doing so there were a few words that he felt incumbent upon to say. It was a source of great satisfaction of him, he said, and he was sure of all those present, to feel that the long period of mistrust and misunderstanding had now come to an end. There had been a time, not that he or any of the present company had shared such sentiments, but there had been a time when respected proprietors of Animal Farm had been regarded, he would not say with hostility, but perhaps with a certain measure of misgiving, by other human neighbors. Unfortunate incidents had occurred, mistaken ideas had been current, it had been felt by the existence of the farm owned and operated by the pigs was somehow abnormal and was liable to have unsettled effects on the neighborhood. Too many farmers had assumed, without due inquiry, that such a farm a spirit of license and indiscipline would prevail. They had been nervous about the effects upon their own animals, or even upon the human employees, but all such doubts were now dispelled. Today, he and his friends had visited Animal Farm and inspected every inch of it with their own eyes. And what do they find? Not only the most up-to-date methods, but the discipline of the orderliness which should be an example to the farmers everywhere. He believed that he was right in saying that the lower animals on Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animals in the country. Indeed, he and his fellow visitors today had observed many features which they intend to introduce on their own farms immediately. He would end his remarks, he said, by emphasizing once again the friendly feelings that subsisted and ought to subsist between Animal Farm and its neighbors. Between pigs and human beings there need to be any clash of interest whatsoever. Their struggles and their difficulties were one. Was not the labor problem that same everywhere? Here it became apparent that Mr. Pinkerton was about to spring some carefully prepared witticism on the company, but for a moment he was too overcome by amusement to be able to utter it. After much choking, during which his various chins turned purple, he managed to get it out. "If you have your lower animals to contend with," he said, "we have our lower classes." The bon mot set the table in a roar, and Mr. Pinkerton once again congratulated the pigs on the low rations and long working hours and general absence of pampering which he now observed on Animal Farm. And now, he said finally, he would ask the company to rise to their feet and make certain that their glasses were full. "Gentlemen," he concluded, "Mr. Pinkerton, gentlemen, I give you a toast to the prosperity of Animal Farm." There was enthusiastic cheering and stamping of feet. Napoleon was so grateful that he left his place and came around the table to clink his mug against Mr. Pinkerton's before emptying it. When the cheering had died down, Napoleon, who had remained on his feet, intimated that he was a few words to say. Like all of Napoleon's speeches, it was short and to the point. He too, he said, was happy that the period of misunderstanding was at an end. For a long time there had been rumors, circulated, he had reason to think, by some malignant enemy, that there was something subversive and even revolutionary in the outlook of himself and his colleagues. They had been credited with attempting to stir up rebellion among the animals in neighboring farms. Nothing could be further from the truth. Their sole wish now and in the past was to live in peace and in normal business relations with their neighbors. This farm, which he had honor to control, he added, was a cooperative enterprise. The title deeds which were on his possession were owned by the pigs jointly. He did not believe, he said, that any of the old suspicions still lingered, but certain changes had been made recently in the routine of the farm which should have been effect promoting confidence still further. Hitherto, the animals on the farm had rather foolish custom of addressing one another as comrade. This was to be suppressed. There had been very strange custom, which origin was unknown, of marching every Sunday morning past a boar's skull which was nailed to a post in the garden. This too was to be suppressed, and the skull had already been buried. His visitors might have observed, too, the green flag which flew from the masthead. If so, they would perhaps have noted that the white hoof and horn which it had previously been marked had now been removed. It would be a plain green flag from now onwards. He only had one criticism, he said, to make of the Pinkerton excellent and neighborly speech. Mr. Pinkerton had referred throughout to Animal Farm. He could not, of course, know, for he, Napoleon, was only now the first time announcing it, that the name Animal Farm had been abolished. Henceforth, the farm was to be known as the Manor Farm, which he believed was the correct and original name. Gentlemen, concluded Napoleon, I will give you some toast before, but in different form. Fill your glasses to the brim, gentlemen. Here's my toast. To the prosperity of the Manor Farm. There was same hearty cheering as before, and the mugs were emptied to the dregs. But the animals outside gazed at the scene. It seemed to them that some strange thing was happening. What was this altered in the faces of the pigs? Clover's old dim eyes flitted from one face to another. Some of them had 5 chins, some of them had 4, some of them had 3. But what was it that seemed to be melting and changing? Then the applause having come to an end, the company took upon their cards and continued the game. They had been interrupted, and the animals crept silently away. But they had not gone 20 yards when they stopped short. An uproar of voices were coming from the farmhouse. They rushed back and looked through the windows again. Yes, a violent quarrel was in progress. There was shouting, banging of the table, sharp, suspicious glances, furious denials. The source of the trouble appeared to be that Napoleon and Mr. Pinkerton had each played the ace of spades simultaneously. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which.